Without any warning, when a person is told they have a disease that is life-changing, their immediate response is often fear. In today's show, you will hear a couple of inspiring stories of courage and strength. The first story is of Jacalyn Flax, a beautiful actress from England who received the shocking news in her early 20s of being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
I suppose that life has many different turning points. One of my first major turning points was being diagnosed with MS. When I was 23, I just got married. I was doing a show in the West End, and I had my first, which was actually my second attack. Because the first time I had an attack, they couldn't diagnose, they couldn't find what it was wrong. I had an attack while I was engaged. And they thought it was because of the stress of getting married. They're like, oh, well, you're so busy and you're burning the candle at both ends, and you know, so that's why it happened. And then when it happened after we were married, in the next 6 months, then they decided to give me the full MRI and the full diagnosis, and that's when they diagnosed that it was multiple sclerosis. And actually not even then, because they still were not sure. And my reaction actually was anger. I was so angry that this could happen to me. I was mad as you know what. I just could not believe that I had all these things in place in my life. Had my husband, had the house, had the show, and then suddenly, bang, this happens to me. And it was outrage. I wasn't frightened. There was no fear. I was just angry as hell. And we went through all the different diagnoses. And because the first part of multiple sclerosis is very much relapsing and remitting, which means you come out of it 100%, pretty much. You don't really have any symptoms. I came out of it, you know, and then I carried on my life just as normal. And then bang, 6 months later, I was back in hospital. Again, same thing, angry. I was so mad that this could happen. And this just kept going on. It just kept getting weaker and weaker, and the attacks got worse and worse. But you have to remember, I had an agenda. I had a life to get back to. I was so, you know, on my path. And every time that I got well again, I was like, that's it, I'm back, you know what I mean? And it was like, it kind of held me up, but it didn't stop me. And it went on like this. And I never took any drugs because the exercise worked for me. Instead of injecting myself every morning like I know people do to take away any further symptoms, the exercise was what worked for me. Because acting was my chosen profession, and your body is your craft, it's your vehicle, it's what you sell. So I couldn't tell anyone that I had MS, and so I found a perfect vehicle for me, which was a one-woman show, which I did for about 6 years in the Valley, where the woman, Shirley Valentine, drinks through most of the show. So if my balance was off, people thought I was acting. They thought it was part of the show and that I was drunk. It was towards the end of the first act, and I'd been peeling potatoes, and then suddenly I felt so sick. And I didn't know what to do. I threw up into the bowl of potatoes. And I sat there like, oh my God, because they saw me throw up. My friend rushes down the middle aisle because he knew. He picks me up and he takes me off the stage. So I'm like, I'm not going back on. This is dreadful. It was my first night as well. I feel terrible. So Peter said to me, if the audience stays, if they all get up and leave, then we'll call it quits. But if they stay there and wait for you to come back, then you better go back. Well, of course, I had to do a change, and I'm sitting there, and I am like, I'm not going back. This is insane. And they're changing me while I'm sitting there. And I said, this is it. You tell them I'm sick and I'm not going back. And they just open the door and they push me back on. So I'm on the stage. Nobody left the theatre. Nobody moved. And the first line of the second act was, ooh, I felt sick. And there was such a roar from the audience. It was so funny. And I looked at the audience, they looked at me and they started cheering and clapping. It was hysterical, and then the play just went on from there and it was fine. And then, because Malibu Times came down to review the show, and at the end of the show, I said to them, I'm not going to bow, because, you know, they would like give me a standing ovation, which was really lovely. But I said, I'm not going to bow because I might throw up. And that was the headline. Actress says she won't bow because she might throw up. And I said that I had food poisoning. And so that was the article. I kept it. It's a very funny article. I think I was out here about 20 years, and I was doing a show called Cabaret in Palm Springs. And Gloria Greer came down to review it. And when I met her, she just started this charity called Act for MS. And it was to do with, the ACT stood for acting, cuisine and theatre, I think. And they were doing this whole thing. But basically what it was about was that it's a hands-on charity to help people who suffer from multiple sclerosis, who live in the valley. And instead of like being all involved in research and stuff, it's very hands-on. How can we help people who have multiple sclerosis now? There really isn't a neurologist that knows about this illness. Because it changes so much, and because it's different in so many people, that really you are in control of it. And if you hand it over to somebody else and say, fix me, it's not going to help. You really need to take charge of this yourself. You have to be proactive, not reactive, and you have to be your own doctor.
If you're questioning whether or not you're in a healthy relationship, Counselor Dean Del Guidice has some expert advice that just may be of some interest.
You know, I realized, much to my chagrin, that the reason I married a nut the first time around is because I was a nut myself, and like does attract like. So at that point, I wasn't ready to see the point that I had a bunch of flaws and I was doing a lot of things wrong relationship-wise with a woman. And so, of course, I blamed her for everything. Now, that doesn't diminish the fact that, you know, she had all of her issues, but had I been healthy and whole, I never would have been attracted to a person like that to begin with, or it would have been brief. I would have discovered very early on in the relationship what she was about. But because I didn't know what wholeness really was, I wasn't able to see that. And it was only after that relationship, you know, didn't work out and we did get divorced after 8 years that that I went into therapy and I did discover who I really was, why I do the things I do for real, not why I think I do the things I do, okay? And there's a big difference. And then I was able to attract a person who was whole. And it's made all the difference in the world. And I think that men need to understand, if they think that their wife is, you know, this, that, and the other thing, okay, she may very well be. But that's also a direct reflection of who they are, because water seeks its own level, okay? And if you're a really healthy person, you're not going to be hanging out with somebody who's really unhealthy. And vice versa. If you're really unhealthy and, you know, you want this healthy wife, mentally and emotionally healthy, she's not going to stick around with you either. So you have to get your act together as a man in order to have any expectations from a woman or be able to see even the things that you need and don't need, want and don't want in a relationship. You have to know yourself in order to discern those things. And so many people don't know. So my biggest tip to men would be to figure out what your part in a relationship is. Is your wife happy? Are you giving her what she needs? You know. Now, of course, if her needs are unreasonable, or the more you give, the more she takes, that's a pathology. That's something that has to be identified, and you have to say, come on, you know, we need to go work on that in therapy. And if she doesn't want to, well then, you know, I'm not hanging around for this stuff much longer. It's a one-way street. And so that's what I do as a therapist. That's where I'm able to go in and give this information to men, give them the things that I needed during that time of my life and the things that I then got from my therapist, and help them have realizations. You know, it's so hard to sort out who's muddying the waters in the relationship, and the men are confused. And I say, well, you make sure that you're impeccable. You keep your feet still. And if that water is still muddy, you'll know it's the other person who's stomping around and raising up the mud, okay? So no matter what the other person does, maintain your impeccability. Because if you react to the other person's issues or problems, then they're just going to point at you and say, see, you're the jerk I always thought you were because you had a reaction to it. Instead of just sitting there and saying, you know, I'm not doing this in the relationship. I don't bring this negativity to the table. I wonder why you do. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hang in there unless that changes, because I don't deserve to be treated that way. You know, I bring this goodness and you bring this other thing. That's why, as a man or as a woman, always make sure what you're bringing to the table is impeccable, and then you will know very quickly, you know, who's doing what. So instead of being quick to blame the other, why don't we all just realize that we all have our faults as humans and say that to our partner. You know, look, we both probably have a hand in this, so why don't we both just go and see a marriage therapist and work on our issues so that we can make our relationship all that it can be. You know, something really good.
Scott Hines, former mayor of Rancho, Mirage, California, passed away earlier this year. He did, however, leave a legacy. In this next segment, he shares his journey in politics and his passion for making a difference.
In the 6th grade, I ran for class president. I don't know why at the time I did it. It just felt like the thing to do. I think because there was this girl, Becky Rogers, and she was really hateful, and I just couldn't see her being our class president, so I had to take her out. And that was the beginning of my political career. And I was pretty much the class president or the student council president all during my growing up. And it's just the way I'm wired. I was just always kind of a natural leader. I was never afraid to get up in front of people. I wasn't afraid to take charge. And really, at the end of the day, I like helping people. And it's the amazing power that you have in an elected position, is that you can make a difference in people's lives or give people a voice that don't have a voice. So, you know, when I went to college, I majored in political science. I got a master's degree in public management and another one in organizational management, all kind of geared towards government. That's always been sort of my thing. Some people are into college football, other people like art. I happen to like both of those things also, but politics is my passion, always has been. I spent a number of years when I first came here to Southern California as a lobbyist. I worked on the other side of the aisle as an advocate, and I represented some of the cities in my community and school districts and different renewable energy providers and different things like that. And I saw in that job a lot of people who were in politics for all the wrong reasons. They lusted for power. They were trying to enrich themselves. They were narcissists. And it just gave me a sick feeling, because it's such a responsibility to be in this job. When you're a mayor, the people don't work for you, you work for the people. I'm in a small town, but I have thousands of bosses, and they are the people who elected me. So in my area, you know, I had been involved in a lot of nonprofits, and everybody knew that I was involved in politics and was perceived to be a powerful lobbyist in the area, which I still think is kind of funny because I'm a really nice guy, but not your typical lobbyist, I guess. And there was an opening in my city, and I live in a community mostly of retirees. We're a very affluent community. The average age is 63 years old, so I'm a bit of an anomaly in this community. But there was nobody representing me and my interests on this particular city council, because everyone was in their 70s and 80s. So one of the gentlemen who'd been here for many years passed away, and there was an open seat. And that didn't happen very often. He'd been here for 25 years in office. So a group of friends came to me and said, you should consider running for office to give some of the young professionals and other people who live in our community some representation on the council. And I thought that made a lot of sense, and it was natural for me, and I knew how to do the job because I'd been advising these people for a lot of years. So I decided to run, and I thought, oh, it'll be a fun process. Whew, boy, did I not anticipate the pushback that I would get as an openly gay, progressive, younger person in the city of Rancho Mirage. running for office. And it was a brutal campaign. I was running, there were 7 of us running. My biggest competitor was an 82-year-old guy. And the big thing that they made an issue out of was not that I was, a perceived liberal, not that I was gay, it was that I was too young at 40 years old to run for office. So the whole issue became about age, which was very interesting. At the end of the day, I won by 11 votes. So from day one, half the city was really happy that I got elected, and half the city was really angry that I got elected, and I had enemies really kind of for the first time in my life. So I've had to really learn how to build coalitions, how to win people over that are very suspicious of you. But I love it. I love being the mayor of my city because there are so many people who never had anyone fighting for them here. There are so many people who just need somebody in a position of authority to listen to them, to help them, to be there for them. And so that's how I approach the job. I have a lot of bosses who have a lot of desires and needs, and I try to help them out as best as possible and just make the best decisions I can. And if I get reelected, great. And if I don't, I will have served with honor and distinction and been my own man in the 4 years that I was given this gift to lead my city.
Reverend Joe Hooper from the Center for Spiritual Living gives us sound advice on living a happier life.
If people believe themselves to be a mess, they continue to create messes. It isn't until they reach the bottom of the barrel or they have some turning point or something changes, then the light goes on. They realize that's not who I'm supposed to be. The reality is this: they were never supposed to be that because they weren't aligned with the divine nature of spirit. Now they're becoming more and more aligned, and their life will reflect that. Will there be steps back? Absolutely. That's just phase and function of spirit. We move through these things. It's like giving birth. You just have to go through that process to get to where you want to go. But if you're miserable and you keep talking to everybody about how miserable you are, expect to stay that way. If you want to experience joy, stop talking about the things you don't want to experience. Just stop talking. Everybody knows your story. You've shared it on email, you share it on Facebook, you Twitter about it, you talk to everybody about it, you call everybody on the cell phone, everybody knows. And what they want to say is, stop the storyline. It's old. Stop talking about this. Shift your consciousness, shift your mindset to that which you want to experience. When you do that, the universe, like it supported the negative energy that you tried to push forward, the universe will support your positive flow of energy, and it will align itself with certain situations, circumstances, and people who will be divinely guided when you're divinely guided for your highest and best good. I'm going to go to the door, and I'm going to open up the door. And I give my consent to whatever's going to come in. Now, I can keep the door closed, and I can change whoever's going to come in. But I have to give them permission. I'm the gatekeeper of my thoughts. I'm the gatekeeper of my thoughts. And as a gatekeeper of my thoughts, I allow whatever I want to come in, and I allow whatever I want to leave. And as soon as I allow that to come in, I will experience it. One of the things I have to realize is I have to allow everyone safe passage through my hallway. They don't necessarily have to come into my room, but I have to allow them safe passage, which means they get to do what they want to do. They're on their own path. I don't have to obstruct their journey or try to get in their way or try to alter their path. They're on their path. Your kids are on their path. We do the best we can to raise them. Then they're on their path. They make choices and they pay the consequences. They enjoy the victories and they enjoy the defeats. But the reality is this: I just have to allow my door to swing open when I want to give mental consent to some experience that I want in my life. Someone can be harping on me all the time, and I can sit there over dinner and they can give their opinions about politics or religion or whatever it is, and I don't have to open the door and give them my mental consent. I spend a lot more time in silence now. And that's really disturbing to people, because if you don't respond, they're like, why aren't you talking? Are you mad? Why aren't you responding to me? They believe that you're giving mental consent when really what you're doing is saying, I don't want to participate in this. It's really simple. I just don't want to go where you're going on this conversation. But boy, I tell you what, I spend a lot of time in silence now. And that silence is really upsetting to the people who are used to me talking about everything and having an opinion about everything. I don't always have to share my opinion with everyone about everything. I just allow them to have safe passage through their life. I don't have to jump on their journey. I don't have to get in their boat. Row your own boat. You don't need to jump into somebody else's boat. Let them row their own boat.
Coming up next are some real experts on facing a challenge of a lifetime. When being told that you or someone you love has cancer.
We often think of major injuries or major illnesses as obstacles in our life, and they always occur at the wrong time. There's never a good time for any of these things to occur. So one such circumstance that happened to me was around 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. And of course, it didn't happen at a great time. I just finished my internship. I was going to my residency and was expected to be working 120-hour weeks. But it was something that I had to deal with. And actually, it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. And that's sometimes hard to think about when you're diagnosed with cancer and it's something that can kill you, and you have to think about all the ramifications of those things. So obviously, developing cancer and having to deal with surgical treatment and eventually the recovery was a tough obstacle for me. And I've shared in the past that as a phrase that I love, it's the purpose of life is not to avoid the storms, but to see how well you dance in the rain. And even though I wish I had heard that back then, but that's what I was doing. I was dealing with a storm in my life and somehow getting through that. I think the mark of every one of us is to see how well we can deal with these challenges that we have in our lives, and then how well we do it and how well we can positively affect other people. And there's so many personal experiences that are covered on this show, and we hear it on many other shows, of people that deal with these tough problems and they come out looking better than they were before. And that's all because their perspective was the right perspective, and they tried to turn it from a bad thing into a good thing. So I think that as we look at these storms, and you know that there are going to be storms, the great thing about a storm is there's always going to be an end, and then there's going to be a rainbow. And if you look at a positive way of turning these things around, then that helps you get through it. And for me, even though I didn't know it back then, but I used exercise. I cycled as much as I possibly could to get back into shape and that really helped me get through all the stresses of not only the cancer, but also starting a residency program.
Chris, a patient of Dr. Rufus Gore, finally realized the only next practical step for her active lifestyle would be surgery, which ended up leading her to a new passion in life.
I think to doctors, the many I've met over the years, I'm a nightmare. I've never had more than 3 or 4 colds in my life, but I have 13 orthopedic surgeries. So I was hesitant, resentful. I was a brat when it came. I was obstreperous with doctors. I didn't do what they told me to do. So all my life I have avoided doctors. And I was injured. I had an art gallery in Idlewild, and I had worked very hard. And I was invited to come to this dinner, and I was given a very nice award, the Essence of Idlewild. I live up in the mountains. And I went to say goodbye to folks, and there was no railing and no lights. I stepped off the platform, cracked my elbow on the concrete, and fell down the mountain. And it was dislocated and broken in 3 places. After that surgery and all that, I kept saying, my shoulder hurts, my shoulder hurts. And I went to several doctors, and they injected it, and they gave me things to work out, but it didn't get any better. And finally, a friend of mine in Idlewild, Pete Caparelli, had 2 shoulders done with Dr. Gore, and he said, you really got to see this guy, Chris. I said, you know how I am, but I did. I went down, and you know what? He listened to me. And he also invited me to participate in the treatment. He was willing not just to jump into surgery, but do the things that I was comfortable with. So he was very, very patient. And I don't think he even knew my story, but he was very patient. So finally, we did the surgery. And you know what? not only he was in my room, the anesthesia people were in my room. That team he has, in the operating room, it felt like I was going to a party. Usually you feel like a piece of meat on a slab. I felt like I was invited to a party. And he said, I remember he told me, he said, you know, Sunday night, Sunday I have to take my daughter to a swim meet. He said, would you wait up for me? He went home, changed clothes, came back, sat down, and just sat with me. When they brought my dinner, there was a glass of red wine there. And I said, oh, I didn't order. They said, no, Dr. Gore ordered that for you. And then, oh, the topper, the real topper was, he said, Chris, I think you ought to stay another day. I said, what's the matter? I want to go home. He said, it's not for you. Your husband looks like a deer in the headlights. I think we need to give him another day before we send you up that mountain, you know. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Dr. Gore. So then when it moved on, he was very excited for the fact that I wanted to do this because I wanted to hike the Ring of Kerry in Ireland. And he wanted me to do that. So we even scheduled an appointment after I got back and I brought him pictures. But I said, we have a knee issue. He said, oh no, Chris, you don't deserve to have a knee issue. Well, I will be doing another hike in 3 weeks, and my knee will be celebrating its 1 year. My new knee, which is sculpted beautifully, will be celebrating its first anniversary. And let me tell you why. When I had my knee replaced almost a year ago, I never used a walker and never used a cane, because that man, what surgeon does this? Takes such care that he doesn't traumatize the tissue, that you don't have any pain. You have very, very little. So I walked from day one. Walked. In fact, when I went back to his office, he called in his colleagues and says, you got to see this. She's 1 week out. Look. And he'd say, walk, Chris, walk. Show him. So the man is amazing, and he's a partner in your health.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more inspiring stories, visit us on YouTube by searching Becky and Jessica Allfrey.